My name is Ava Sullivan. I am 33 years old. 3 years ago, my boss Thomas Morgan recruited me to his marketing firm in Denver with promises of mentorship and flexibility for starting a family. He knew my fertility struggles and acted like he cared deeply. It was the beginning of his long con to use me as cover for his schemes. Now, 5 months pregnant, I stand in the Human Resources office as my boss slides documents across the table, accusing me of misusing company funds for personal matters. My pulse races while he stares at me with cold calculation. In that moment, a fierce resolve hardened inside me. I would uncover the truth and protect my future no matter what it cost. If you have ever had a boss who pretended to support you only to stab you in the back, drop a comment below and tell me what happened. Your stories mean everything. The whole thing started 5 years earlier when I walked into that sleek downtown office for what I thought was the interview of a lifetime. My boss, Thomas Morgan, sat across from me in his tailored suit, smiling like a man who had all the answers. He asked about my marketing background, my goals, and then leaned in and said he admired women who balanced ambition with family dreams. I mentioned my husband, Ryan Sullivan, and how we had been trying for a baby for 18 months with no luck. He nodded sympathetically and said the firm had excellent fertility benefits, and he would personally make sure I got the best care. I left that day feeling seen and supported for the first time in my career. My mother, Elizabeth Sullivan, saw the warning signs right away. After I told her about the job offer, she pulled me aside during our weekly coffee and said his charm felt too polished, like he was reading from a script. I laughed it off and told her she was being overprotective. That conversation created a quiet distance between us that lasted nearly 3 years. I chose to believe my boss over my own mother, and looking back, I can see how that decision isolated me from the one person who had always had my back. Life at the firm moved fast after I accepted the position. My boss kept his word about the fertility support. When the specialist confirmed my husband and I needed IVF, he even recommended a specific clinic across town, saying it was the best in the state and the firm had a partnership there. He handled the paperwork himself so I could focus on the emotional side. The first cycle failed and I spent 3 days barely able to get out of bed. My boss sent flowers to my desk with a note that read, "We take care of our own here." The second cycle worked. The positive test came on a Tuesday morning, and I cried happy tears in the office bathroom before telling anyone. My best friend, Ella Whitaker, was the first person I called after my husband. She screamed with joy and offered to throw me the biggest baby shower Denver had ever seen. At work, my boss made a big show of congratulating me in the weekly team meeting, clapping my shoulder and announcing that the firm would give me extra paid leave. Everyone applauded. My coworker, Hazel Carter, squeezed my hand under the table and whispered that I deserved every bit of it. My team supervisor, Mason Reynolds, nodded along, but I noticed he avoided my eyes. Small cracks started appearing a few weeks later. My boss began keeping his office door closed more often, and his phone face down on every surface. He would step out for long calls and come back claiming they were urgent client matters. I found receipts in the shared drive for expensive dinners I knew he had not expensed through normal channels. When I casually asked about them during a one-on-one, he smiled that same polished smile and said I was imagining things because pregnancy made women emotional. The words landed like a slap, but I apologized anyway, blaming the hormones just like he suggested. The financial pressure crept in next. My boss started pushing me to sign new project agreements that gave him full oversight of my largest accounts. He said it was for my protection in case the baby came early. He also suggested I add him as an emergency contact on my health insurance forms so he could step in if needed. I thought it was odd, but practical. Then he mentioned in passing that the firm was restructuring bonuses and I should consider rolling my upcoming performance payout into a joint investment account he managed. My husband and I had a long talk that night and decided it felt off. I politely declined. My boss's warmth evaporated after that. He became distant in meetings, assigning me the most demanding deadlines while praising other team members loudly. He started giving me the silent treatment for days whenever I pushed back on anything. The silent treatments always ended when he needed me to close a deal or fix a campaign. It was almost funny how his principles had an expiration date tied to his own deadlines. One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. to a text from my best friend. She had seen my boss at a downtown restaurant with his assistant, their heads close together over drinks. The photos she sent showed them laughing in a way that did not look like business. When I asked my boss the next day, he laughed it off and said, "Networking never stopped." He turned the question back on me, asking if pregnancy paranoia was making me question loyal colleagues. I felt ashamed for even asking. The financial pressure intensified around the same time. My boss's requests became more urgent. He said the firm was facing internal audits, and I should let him review all my client files so he could protect me. He mentioned my grandmother's trust fund in passing one afternoon, the $1.8 million she had left me that I never flaunted. He said it would be smart to update my will now that a baby was coming and suggested I add him as a trustee for practicality. I said no gently. His face went cold. From that day forward, he barely spoke to me unless it was to criticize my work in front of the team. My coworker Hazel Carter pulled me aside in the break room a week later. She had overheard my boss on a call saying he needed everything settled by spring and that certain people would be dealt with after maternity leave. Hazel looked worried and told me to watch my back. My team's supervisor, Mason Reynolds, walked by right then and gave her a sharp look that made her stop talking. I thanked her and promised to be careful, but inside, my stomach twisted into knots. The regular OB appointment was scheduled for the following Monday. My usual doctor was on vacation, so I saw Dr. Grace Powell instead. My boss had a mandatory leadership meeting he absolutely could not miss, so I went alone. I lay back on the exam table, cold gel on my belly, waiting to see my baby. Dr. Grace Powell was pleasant at first, making small talk while setting up the equipment. Then she opened my file, glanced at the paperwork, and her face changed. She looked at my name, looked at the notes about my boss's involvement with the clinic referral, and her hands started to tremble. She set down the ultrasound wand, reached over, and turned off the monitor completely. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to speak with you privately right now." She walked me to her office, closed the door, and locked it behind us. Then she said words that cracked my entire world wide open. "I know what your boss did, and I have proof." Dr. Grace Powell's younger sister, Aubrey Powell, worked as a nurse at the fertility clinic my boss had so carefully recommended. 3 weeks earlier, Aubrey had shown up at her sister's apartment close to midnight, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. The guilt had been eating her alive. 5 months ago, my boss Thomas Morgan had approached her at the clinic. He was charming, well-dressed, and said he had a special situation that required discretion. He claimed there was a company policy issue he needed to keep quiet and offered $45,000 for help switching samples. Between him and the embryologist he paid separately, the switch went undetected. Dr. Grace Powell laid the folder open on her desk. The original records showed my husband's sample had been replaced with sperm from a paid donor named Caleb Thompson. My boss had planned the entire thing so that after the baby was born, he could alter the clinic records and suggest a DNA test as a team-building exercise. When the results proved it was not my husband's child, he would accuse me of having an affair with a client violating company policy and use it to fire me without severance while blaming me for leaks in his own embezzlement scheme. He had $180,000 in gambling debts and had siphoned $53,000 from client accounts. I was supposed to be his scapegoat. I sat there for a long time, the papers spread out in front of me, shock, turning to something cold and focused. My boss thought I was an easy mark. He had no idea who he had just crossed. I looked at Dr. Grace Powell and asked for copies of everything and a direct connection to her sister Aubrey. She agreed without hesitation. As I left the office, I kept my face neutral, hands steady on the wheel because I knew my boss had installed security cameras in the office parking lot 2 years earlier under the guise of employee safety. I drove straight to a private investigator named Penelope Reed. She listened without interrupting, took notes, and when I finished, she smiled like someone who had just been handed the perfect case. "Your boss made a lot of arrogant mistakes," she said. "Give me 10 days. She had results in 8. The gambling debts were confirmed. The embezzlement was real. And there was an affair with his assistant that had been going on for 8 months, complete with hotel receipts and text messages." Penelope had also tracked down the previous victim, a woman named Lillian Klein, who had worked for my boss 5 years earlier in another city. Lillian was ready to provide a statement. I met Aubrey Powell in secret at a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of Denver. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but she nodded when I asked if she would testify. My husband held my hand the whole time and said we would get through this together. My mother, the woman I had pushed away for 3 years, answered my call on the second ring. When I told her everything, she simply asked, "What do you need, sweetheart?" "No, I told you so. Just love." My lawyer, Noah Jenkins, reviewed the evidence and coordinated with the right people. But I knew I could not stay silent forever. 2 days later, my boss called an emergency team meeting. I walked in with my folder tucked under my arm, heart pounding but resolve steady. He started the meeting by praising the team and then turned to me with that same polished smile. "Ava, we need to discuss your recent performance and how it affects the firm's reputation." The trap was closing, but this time I was the one holding the evidence. The room fell silent as every head turned toward me. My boss leaned back in his chair, that polished smile never reaching his eyes, and launched straight into the attack like he had rehearsed it for weeks. "Ava, let's be honest here," he said, voice dripping with that fake concern he always used when he wanted to twist the knife. "Your recent performance has been slipping in ways that make the entire firm look bad. I mean, with the baby coming, I get it, but some people just cannot balance family distractions and real professional responsibility. We have seen questionable charges on your project accounts, and I have to ask if this is the kind of reputation you want to carry forward." The words hit like ice water down my spine. I felt my cheeks burn, but I kept my face neutral, the folder heavy under my arm. My boss had no idea I knew everything, but he was already painting me as the unreliable pregnant employee, the one dragging everyone down. He turned to the team and added with a sharp little laugh, "We all want what is best for the company, right? Loyalty matters more than ever these days." My team's supervisor, Mason Reynolds, shifted in his seat and cleared his throat. His usual easygoing nod gone. Instead of staying quiet or agreeing like he normally did, he suddenly cut in with a defensive edge in his voice. "Look, Thomas, Ava has closed more deals than anyone this quarter. Maybe we should look at the numbers again before jumping to conclusions." It was the first time I had ever heard him push back against my boss in a meeting, and for a split second it felt like a lifeline. But my boss's eyes narrowed and he fired back without missing a beat. "Numbers can be misleading when personal issues get in the way, Mason. Let us not pretend otherwise." The room tensed, and just like that, the small show of support from Mason cracked under the pressure, leaving me feeling more exposed than before. My coworker, Hazel Carter, squeezed my hand under the table again, her eyes wide with worry, but she stayed silent this time. Knowing any word from her could make it worse. I sat there listening to my boss list off fabricated concerns about my focus, my deadlines, even hinting that my personal distractions might be affecting client trust. Every sentence was laced with that biting sarcasm he loved, the kind that sounded helpful on the surface, but cut straight to my core. "Pregnancy changes people," he said smoothly, "but the firm cannot afford to carry dead weight. We have standards, Ava. High ones." I wanted to slam the folder down right then and watch his face crumble, but something held me back. The evidence was still fresh, and my lawyer had warned me to wait for the right moment. Instead, I forced a calm reply. "I understand your concerns, but I have documentation that might clarify a few things about those accounts." My voice stayed steady even though my heart was hammering. My boss's smile faltered for the tiniest fraction of a second before he recovered, waving a hand like I was being dramatic. "Documentation? From who exactly?" "Let us not turn this into some conspiracy, Ava. We all know how emotional these situations can get." The meeting dragged on for another 40 minutes of him circling the same points, each jab sharper than the last, designed to make me doubt myself and make the team see me as the problem. By the time it ended, my boss pulled me aside in the hallway, his voice dropping low so no one else could hear. "This does not have to get ugly," he said, eyes cold. "Sign the revised agreement I sent over. Let me handle the accounts like I suggested, and we can move past this. Otherwise, well, reputations have a way of sticking around long after the paycheck stops." It was a direct threat wrapped in concern, and it sent a chill through me. I nodded like I was considering it, but inside, I was already planning my next move. That afternoon, I slipped out early and called my private investigator from a quiet corner of the parking garage. Penelope Reed picked up on the first ring and confirmed the latest updates. The affair with his assistant had been going on for 8 months, with hotel receipts that matched the ones I had seen before. She had also dug deeper into the gambling debts now confirmed at $180,000, and the embezzlement trail led straight to client funds he had quietly moved. "He is desperate," she said, "and desperate people make mistakes. But watch your back. He has already started spreading quiet rumors around the office about your reliability." I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. Next, I called my lawyer Noah Jenkins, who listened carefully and told me the evidence from the clinic was ironclad. Dr. Grace Powell and her sister Aubrey were both ready to provide sworn statements, and the donor Caleb Thompson had even agreed to cooperate once he learned how his involvement had been twisted. But my boss was moving fast. By the end of the day, an internal email went out to the whole team announcing a surprise performance review process for anyone on maternity track, and my name was listed first. It felt like a public warning shot. My best friend Ella Whitaker met me for a quick coffee after work, her face tight with anger when I told her what had happened in the meeting. "He is trying to isolate you," she said, voice sharp. "Just like he did with that other woman years ago. You cannot let him win." She offered to come stay with me and my husband for a few nights, but I knew bringing anyone else into this could give my boss more ammunition. Still, her support reminded me I was not completely alone. That evening, my husband listened while I laid everything out again, the folder open between us on the kitchen table. He looked exhausted but determined, squeezing my hand and saying we would fight this together. I felt a flicker of hope until my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of an internal memo my boss had apparently drafted, claiming I had accessed restricted client files without authorization and suggesting my pregnancy had caused lapses in judgment. The message ended with a single line, "TikTok Ava. Choices have consequences." My stomach dropped. How had he gotten my personal number for this? The next morning, the pressure ramped up even more. My boss called me into his office alone, closing the door with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. He slid a new set of documents across the desk this time, with my signature already forged at the bottom on one of the account oversight forms. "Sign the real one," he said, voice low and venomous. "Or I will make sure everyone knows exactly how unreliable you have become. Think about the baby Ava. Think about what kind of future you want for that child if mommy gets blacklisted from every marketing firm in Denver." The sarcasm was gone now, replaced by pure, cold calculation. I stared at the papers, my resolve hardening even as fear clawed at my chest. Hazel Carter had texted me earlier that morning, warning that my boss had pulled her aside and asked pointed questions about my attitude lately, clearly trying to turn my own coworker against me. Mason Reynolds, meanwhile, had sent a quick message saying he was sorry about the meeting, but that he could not risk his own position by speaking up again. Their reactions left me feeling the walls closing in, like the support I thought I had was already crumbling. I left his office without signing anything heart-pounding and drove straight to my mother's house for the first time in 3 years. She opened the door without a word of reproach, just pulled me into a hug and listened while I poured out the latest threats. "What do you need, sweetheart?" she asked again, the same calm strength in her voice that I had missed for so long. We talked for hours about the lawyer's plan and how we could time the exposure just right. But even as we spoke, my phone kept buzzing with more messages from my boss, each one more insistent, each one reminding me that he still held the power in this building. By the end of the week, the rumors my boss had started about my lapses in judgment reached 3 major clients, and suddenly projects I had led for years were reassigned. The board chose to protect the firm's image rather than rock the boat, and my boss remained untouched, his position stronger than ever because no one wanted the scandal. I knew then that staying would mean surrendering every boundary I had fought to set. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I submitted my resignation the following week, citing personal reasons to avoid any further drama, and walked out of the building I had once loved with nothing but my severance and the baby growing inside me. My husband supported the choice, but the financial strain of losing my steady income hit us harder than I expected. My best friend tried to rally me with calls and offers of help, yet even she could not fill the emptiness of losing the career I had built from the ground up. My mother visited often after the baby was born, bringing meals and quiet company, but the 3 years of distance had left cracks that no single conversation could fully mend. I felt grateful for her presence, yet strangely disconnected, like I was starting over in a life that no longer included the colleagues I once considered friends. Hazel Carter sent a single supportive text the day I left, but Mason Reynolds never reached out again, and the rest of the team slowly faded into silence. The isolation settled in slowly, a quiet loneliness that came from choosing myself over the toxic environment, but it carried no victory, only the heavy weight of self-preservation. 2 months after the resignation, I sat in my living room feeding the baby and staring at the severance check that would only last so long. My mother stopped by with groceries, and we talked about the old days, but the conversation always circled back to how much I had given up. My husband came home from his own job looking worn, and we both knew the decision had shifted our entire future. I learned through all of this that setting boundaries sometimes means walking away with less than you started with. My boss kept his power, the firm moved on without a ripple, and I was left rebuilding alone with my child and the few people who truly chose to stay. It was not the dramatic justice I once hoped for, but it was the only way to protect my peace. Family and loyalty are not about titles or offices. They are about who stands with you when the pressure is unbearable, and sometimes that circle ends up smaller than you ever imagined. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to walk away from a situation that was slowly destroying you just to save yourself, tell me in the comments what that felt like and whether the loneliness was worth the freedom. Your stories remind me I am not alone in this.